Hello everyone, my name is Emily and today we are going to be looking at the stories in opera, or in other words, the libretto. The libretto is the story that runs throughout an opera, but there are some differences between that and the story in a book or a play. We all know what a story in a book is. You read a book from start to end and you don't need anything extra, just the words on the page to give you a complete experience of the story. So, what is the difference between a book and a script for a play? Well, a play script has some added information in it, and it works a bit more like a conversation than a description. It has the names of the different characters listed in the play, and the different lines of text are all assigned to different characters, so that it creates a real-life conversation or dialogue when people read it. There are also some sections which set the scene, where the writer describes the place and the people that are in the scene. Here's an example from Shakespeare's play, The Tempest. On a ship at sea, a tempestuous noise of thunder and lightning is heard. Enter a master and a boatswain.
All right, folks.
So, if that is the function of a play script, then what is the difference between that and a libretto? Let's have a look at the first page of a libretto for Dido and Aeneas. It has the venue of the performance, Mr. Josias Priest's boarding school at Chelsea. We will come back to Mr. Josias in one of our later videos, because he was a really fantastic dancer, which might be why there is a lot of dancing in this opera. The libretto also has the name of our librettist, the poet, named Tate. And of course, the composer, Henry Purcell. Do any of you think that it's strange that the opera was performed in a school? That used to happen quite a lot 400 years ago. Other than that, the libretto is very similar to a play script. It starts with a scene description. Phoebus rises in the chariot over the sea, the Nereids out of the sea. And then it goes on to the kind of conversation or dialogue that you find in the play scripts. So far, it is hard to see what the difference is. But there is one really big difference. These libretti, printed in small booklets just like in the picture, would be given to the audience to read during the opera. Could you imagine going to a play and being given a book of the script to read along while you watch? It just wouldn't happen. So why were opera audiences given the libretto? Maybe it has something to do with the way the words are spoken. Wait a second. Are the words in an opera spoken? Oh yeah, you're right. There's no speaking in opera because everything is sung. And the reason the audiences were given the libretto during the performance was so that even if the words were hard to hear because they were being sung in fancy, complicated ways, they could still follow the storyline. So, does the fact that everything is sung in an opera change the way the writer of the libretto would write the words? Well, probably, yes. Let's listen to a short clip from the beginning of Dido and Aeneas. Listen carefully. Can you tell me the words that the singer is singing?
Empire growing, pleasures growing, fortune smiles, and so should you. Shake the cloud from off your brow. Shake the cloud from off your brow.
Now let's see whether you got it right.
Empire growing, pleasures growing, fortune smiles, and so should you. Shake the cloud from off your brow. Shake the cloud from off your brow.
Did you hear that some words were stretched over lots of different notes sung by the singer, like flowing and shake? When lots of notes are sung over one word by the singer, that's called a melisma. Or if there's loads and loads of notes, sometimes it's called coloratura, which is a chance for the singer to really show off their fancy singing skills. Because opera audiences were so eager to hear singers show off their skills, it was important that the librettist wrote some songs to give them a chance to do that. and it made sense to keep the text in those songs quite short so that the singers could focus on singing and not worry too much if some of the words were lost. To help with this, librettists didn't just keep the words short and simple in these songs, but they would also sometimes repeat the same line of text over and over again. In this next song, called Haste, Haste, how many times can you count the word haste?
Haste, haste to town, haste, 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 haste to town, haste, 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 haste. There's hope and fail no shelter, there's hope and fail no shelter from the storm. The storm can do. Haste, 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 haste to town, haste, haste to town, haste, 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 haste to town.
How many times did you count haste? It was 23 times! Did you catch the other words that she sang? Probably not. I know I didn't catch them all, but because the librettist chose to repeat the word haste so many times, even if we might not catch all the other words, we can still tell what the song is about. There is another song in Dido and Aeneas called Ho Ho Ho, which only has the word ho in it. Let's have a listen. But not all songs in an opera have so few words. You might remember from our previous video that we talked about songs called recitatives. Well, recitatives are where the singers sing as if they are speaking, and the librettist can use these to fit in lots of the storyline into as small a space as possible. Now let's listen to the full sequence which has the Ho 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 song in it, and you will see how Nahum Tate, the librettist, squeezes in lots of the storyline into the recitatives around it. This is the part of the story where the witches plan to destroy Dido by creating a fake Mercury to order Aeneas to go to Italy and leave Dido behind.
Deprived of fame, of life and love. When the set of song, tell us, how shall this be done? The Trojan prince, you know, is bound by fate to seek Italian ground. The queen and he are now in chase. Hark, hark, the cry comes on apace. But when they've done, my trusty elf in form of Mercury himself, as sent from Jove, shall chide his stay and charge him sail tonight with all his fleet away.
Mercury was the Roman god of wealth and fortune, a messenger between the other Roman gods, and also a bit of a troublemaker. Have you noticed that all of the characters that we have mentioned in the libretto have mythical names? This was because, even though Purcell wrote Dido and Aeneas almost 100 years after the Florentine Camerata first started writing opera, people were still really obsessed with the ancient Greeks and other ancient societies like the Romans, and they wanted all the opera stories to somehow link back to these ancient mythological times. The story of Dido and Aeneas is actually adapted from a really long poem called the Aeneid by an ancient Roman poet called Virgil. It's so long that it has 9,896 lines and also has to be spread over 12 books. The first 6 books are all about Aeneas' journey from Troy, his hometown, to Italy, and the 4th book is when he meets Dido. So how have the storylines in operas changed over the years? Well, let me tell you in under 3 minutes. After Purcell, there was a big battle between 2 different styles, opera seria and opera buffa. Opera seria had the serious plots with tragedy and heroism and liked to use mythological characters or classical characters from history. Opera buffa was the opposite of that, with very light-hearted and funny plots and characters which were much more human and relatable. Common people with common problems. At the end of this time came a man called Gluck, who thought that singers and dancers had too much time in opera to show off, and that the beauty of opera was in a good poetic story. No more long songs with repeated words anymore. In contrast to this, Mozart was writing all sorts of opera buffas with very silly plots and jokes all the way through. Then, in the 1800s, something happened, which was called bel canto style. Bel canto literally means beautiful singing, and this was the beginning of romantic opera. People were ready to abandon the plot again and turn back to the singers, and this time, composers even ditched the recitative part of operas for more music with the whole orchestra playing. We then arrive at Musikdrama, which the composer Wagner was famous for. Wagner wanted everything to be about the drama, and he decided the easiest way to make sure it got the attention it needed was to be in control of everything, from the libretto and the music right down to the staging. Wagner's most famous work is called The Ring Cycle, which is 17 hours long. It is actually 4 operas stuck together, usually watched over a number of days, and it's all about German mythology. After Wagner came a movement called Verissimo, which means real or true. Again, people wanted to hear more natural and relatable stories, so librettists started to write about common people and poor people. The plots were usually very dramatic and full of love, revenge and murder. Some of the most famous composers from this time are Puccini, Mascagni and Bizet. By now, we've reached the 1900s, where things started to go in many different directions. There was Berg's Lulu, which is about a woman who lives in the streets and causes havoc. The Nose, by Shostakovich, which is about a general whose nose leaves his body and creates a life of its own. The Rake's Progress, by Stravinsky, which is based on a series of 8 paintings. Britain's Curlew River, which is based on the ancient Japanese art of no theatre. John Adams' Nixon in China, which describes a trip that the president made in 1972 to meet Chairman Mao. And there is even a jazz opera written by Gershwin called Porgy and Bess, which is based on a novel about a disabled street beggar living in the slums of America. Today, opera librettos can be about almost anything that you can think of. There are still lots of operas based on books, plays and mythological stories, just like Dido's Ghost, which our ensemble, Dunedin Consort, have commissioned as a sequel to Purcell's Dido and Aeneas. But equally, there are operas about modern everyday life things. For example, during lockdown, Scottish Opera recorded an opera called The Telephone, all about a phone conversation, and another opera called The Narcissistic Fish, which is all about working in the kitchen of a restaurant. Wow, that was a lot to fit into 3 minutes. I am very excited because in the next part of this video we get to hear from Wesley Stace, who is the librettist for Dunedin's new opera, Dido's Ghost.
My earliest experiences with opera were all to do with Dido and Aeneas by Purcell, because my mother was a singer and it was her first professional engagement after we moved to a town called Horsham in West Sussex, probably in the early 70s. And not that I specifically remember that those were the songs she was singing, but those were the songs that she was singing. So my first experiences with opera go right back to the very thing that I am now revisiting with Dido's Ghost. I was inspired to write Dido's Ghost with Erilyn Wallen because Erilyn, who's an old friend, her piano teacher knew my mother, who was a singing teacher there, very well. And she came to me and asked me if I had any ideas about Dido. And by coincidence, I write novels and I write songs. And by coincidence, my next novel was going to be a long story about the original myth of Dido and Aeneas from Virgil's Aeneid, and how that story has changed shape over time, and I was going to bring it right up to date. And that was right when Erilyn came to me and said, Do you have any further ideas for it? In fact, I never wrote the novel, but I did have an idea for the opera. My primary job for the past 30-ish years has been as a songwriter. I've released a bunch of albums of my own songs and my own lyrics that I make up the tunes for. And so, in fact, I think I have a pretty good handle on writing words that are going to be sung, which means that what I'm giving Erilyn, because Erilyn is, I am delivering words to her and she is turning them into music. Normally, I just deliver words to myself, and so only I have to be satisfied with those words. But in this instance, I wanted to find a way where I could write with rhythm and bounce and scansion and rhyme that would really appeal to her and be singable in terms of her music. But in fact, in the end, all I really did was write the best lyrics that I could that would have been acceptable to me as a guitarist and songwriter. People wonder what it's like writing a modern version of something so old. And of course, what's happening in our opera is we have that Purcell that is the original thing. That's a very short opera. It's really only an hour and 5 minutes long. And nowadays, when they put it on, they generally want to pair it with something else to make a proper length theatrical entertainment for an evening, because it is quite short. So my idea was to take that Dido and Aeneas, and with another story I found in Ovid's myths, to take an update of the story of Aeneas later on in his life when the ghost of Dido visits him and her sister turns up where he's founded the new kingdom in Rome, and to put that either side of a performance of Purcell's Dido and Aeneas. The original inspiration was really, how can we make Dido and Aeneas from so many years ago by Purcell live again for a modern audience? And when I found this extra story in a piece of work called Ovid's Fasti, which was a piece of Roman literature that explains why the days are named for certain saints. And one of them is named for Anna Perenna. And Anna Perenna is supposedly Dido's sister. And there Ovid tells the story of Anna washed up on the shore of Italy, where she's seen by Aeneas and where Aeneas's wife tries to have her killed out of jealousy when he takes her in as a refugee. And to me, that moment when he sees her coming out of the ocean, washed up, like the girl in Dr. No from the James Bond film and novel, when he sees her coming up, and my first thought was, he'd think it was Dido, who he left and who killed herself. And imagine how that would make him feel. And every idea came from that one image.
Wow! Thank you, Wes, for telling us about what it's like to write a libretto for an opera. And thank you so much for watching today's video. I hope you had fun learning all about the stories in opera. And don't forget to tune in next week when you will meet Clea, who will be teaching you all about the music you hear in opera. Bye!